restoring men in history. Freedom of speech. Why does it matter to you? Why is it so important? We'll look at that today from Cato's letters. Fantastic letters. Thomas Gordon wrote this one, 1721. It's titled Of Freedom of Speech, that the same is inseparable from public liberty. Thomas Gordon. Without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom, and no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech, he says. So without freedom of thought, there can be no what? Wisdom, and that's incredibly important in a society, right? You've got to have wisdom in a society. Society can't last long without it. It's one of the cardinal virtues. Liberty without freedom of speech, none, he says, zero. So no freedom of speech, no liberty, no freedom. He goes on, which is the right of every man as far as by it he does not hurt and control the right of another. And this is the only check which it ought to suffer. So the only bounds which it ought to know. So pretty unlimited, right? He's saying we need pretty unlimited free speech. This sacred privilege is so essential to free government, essential, that the security of property and the freedom of speech always go together. So if you don't have freedom of speech, forget about securing your property, whatever it might be. It might not be land. It might be something else you value that you want to protect. Without the freedom of speech, you can't protect it. You can have the device, the technology, but if you're not allowed to say it and you can't do it, you won't be able to protect what you even own. Essential. They go together. Tyrants don't want many to own property, right? So it wouldn't bother them if you didn't have free speech. In fact, they would enjoy that. Tyrants and big government want to control if they're a bad big government. And in those wretched countries where a man cannot call his tongue his own, isn't that a great line? Can't call his tongue his own. He can scarce call anything else his own. So notice how important and valuable he thinks it is. Whoever would overthrow the liberty of the nation must begin by doing what? What do they always begin with? Subduing the freedom of speech, a thing terrible to public traitors. So watch what big government is doing. Monitor big government. Is it a bad government? You can see by whether they're trying to restrict your freedom of speech. So if you want to destroy the liberty of the nation, subdue freedom of speech, and power-hungry governments, bad governments and tyrants do that, right? You see it through history. This secret was so well known to the court of King Charles I that his wicked ministry procured a proclamation to forbid the people to talk of parliaments. That's a huge deal. It was a huge deal. We're going to go, we're not going to, let's go on. Which those traitors had laid aside to assert the undoubted right of the subject and defend his majesty's legal prerogative was called disaffection. And you ready for this one? It was punished by what? Punished as sedition. Nay, people were forbid to talk of religion in their families. Think about that. You were forbidden to talk of religion in your own family. That is limited speech. That is tyranny. And think about it today. We have the First Amendment here, right? To protect your right to talk about religion and worship and say whatever you want to say without punishment from the federal government. Let's go on. For the priest had combined with the ministers to cook up tyranny and suppress what? What do bad governments always want to suppress? Truth, right? And the law. So they wanted to suppress truth and the law in this example. Sound familiar? Wanting to suppress the truth. Wanted to make something crazy as truth. I mean, today in America, we're trying to make crazy things, selling them as truth. And selling the truth as evil, right? While the late King James, when Duke of York, went avowedly to mass, men were fined, imprisoned, and undone for saying that he was a papist, and that King Charles II might live more securely a papist. There was an act of parliament made declaring it treason to say that he was one. Think about that. Parliament passed an act stopping free speech, moving to tyranny, right there. And see how tyrants or power-hungry parliaments or governments, bad governments, can use the word treason just for speaking against their wishes. And they might mark treason as just speaking against what they want. We have the freedom of speech to be able to say and do what we want without punishment and disagree with the federal government in policy without punishment from the federal government, according to the Bill of Rights, right? That men ought to speak well of their governors is true, while their governors deserve to be well spoken of. But to do public mischief without hearing of it is only the prerogative and felicity of tyranny. A free people will be showing that they are so by what? By their freedom of speech. So how do you recognize free people? If they have free speech. If they don't, they're living under tyranny. And each time it's taken away, you're moving towards tyranny. So you have to watch that. You have to be careful of it. You have to guard against it. You have to call it out. The administration of government is nothing else but the attendance of the trustees of the people upon the interest and affairs of the people. Now, is the government of today believing that? Do they see themselves as trustees or rulers and lords? A government is for you, the people. They are not lords and you are not servants. And as it is the part and business of the people, for whose sake alone all public matters are, they're up there for you, right? Or ought to be transacted to see whether they be well or ill transacted. So it is the interest, or ought to be the ambition, of all honest magistrates to have their deeds openly examined and publicly scanned. Does the government fight against you seeing all the papers or for it? Do they stand in your way of seeing what they're doing? Do they want you to see what they're doing? How transparent are they? Because they work for you, right? They're there to serve you. They're there to protect your individual rights in America. So you can see, so watch, that all honest magistrates, and we can change that to government workers or people that work in the agencies or Congress or whatever, are they open and transparent and working for you? Are they doing that today? Only the wicked governors of men dread what is said of them. So how do you tell the wicked representatives? They dread what is said of them. When they want to define what is good speech or what is hate speech or whatever, these things are warnings. The public censure was true, else he had not felt it bitter. Freedom of speech is ever the symptom as well as the effect of what? Good government, right? So you can look at the healthy symptoms of government if it's moving toward more and more free speech, and unhealthy symptoms if it's moving toward and away from free speech. Guilt only dreads liberty of speech, which drags it out of its lurking holes and exposes its deformity and horror to daylight. So see, if you're guilty, you don't want to shed light on the truth, right? So when governments want to hold on to documents or cover up info or not share, they may be hiding something awful, right? Now he goes on through some examples of people in Rome who had nothing to fear from freedom of speech. Horatius, Valerius, Cincinnatus, and other virtuous and undesigning magistrates of the Roman Commonwealth who had nothing to fear from liberty of speech. Their virtuous administration, he says, the more it was examined, the more it brightened and gained by inquiry. Would that happen today? Does the government want you to see what they're doing? When Valerius in particular was accused upon some slight grounds of affecting the diadem, he who was the first minister of Rome did not accuse the people for examining his conduct, and get this switch, but approved his innocence in a speech to them. He gave such satisfaction to them and gained such popularity to himself that they gave him a new name. And do you know what it was? What name they gave him? That he was their favorite and their friend. That's fantastic, isn't it? That's nice. So here's a question. Who are the best princes? How do you identify the best princes? How do you know who's doing work well for you? He goes on to say this: the best princes have ever encouraged and promoted freedom of speech. So you know a good prince, a good leader, a good government worker encourages and promotes freedom of speech. So who today is promoting freedom of speech and who is not? And you'll see a clear difference. They knew that upright measures would defend themselves and that all upright men would defend them. Tacitus, speaking of the reigns of some of the princes above mentioned, says with ecstasy, a blessed time when you might think what you would and speak what you thought. That's fantastic, isn't it? A blessed time when you might think what you would and speak what you thought. So he considers that a great blessing. And if you're punished for saying something and you think there are thought police, it might affect your thinking and will affect many thinking, right? So how you think, you might start censoring yourself and get into trouble, right? To assert that King James was a papist and a tyrant was only so far hurtful to him. And it was true of him. And if the Earl of Strafford had not deserved to be impeached, he need not have feared a bill of attainder. If our directors and their confederates be not such knaves as the world thinks them, let them prove to all the world that the world thinks wrong, and that they are guilty of none of those villainies which all the world lays to their charge. So let them prove it, right? Others too, who would be thought to have no part of the guilt, must, before they are thought innocent, show that they did all that was in their power to prevent that guilt and to check their proceedings. Big point, right? And here's what he goes on to say that I really think is magnificent. Freedom of speech is the great bulwark of liberty. It's so important to liberty. They prosper and die together, he goes on to say. And it is the terror of traitors and oppressors and a barrier against them. It produces excellent writers. It encourages men of genius. See why that's important and all the benefits, right? Makes the writing better, makes you more creative. See, it increases society to have freedom of speech. So it makes society better, makes you have more opportunities. We want to be the best. We want to reach our potential in life, right? Everybody wants to reach your potential, right? So a key to reaching your potential and an aid is having freedom of speech. It frees your mind. You have freedom of thought. Then you can enable yourself to do and think of great things you want to build, things you want to create, artwork, writings, and your mind's free. You're not having fear and doubt and concern with what you're writing, with what you're saying, that you're going to be punished for it. That impedes your success. So if you want to have great success, you want freedom of speech. If you want to do great things for your family, you want freedom of speech. You want to have the best mind you can have too. You want to have a strong mind that's full of courage, not full of fear. Tacitus tells us that the Roman Commonwealth bred great and numerous authors who writ with equal boldness and eloquence. But when it was enslaved, those great wits were no more. Tyranny had usurped the place of equality. You don't want equality going to tyranny. There'll be all these people at the very top and everybody at the bottom, right? Which is the soul of liberty and destroyed public courage. So it destroyed courage, he goes on to say. So you can see how destroying freedom of speech destroys the writing, creativity, courage, the minds of men, terrified by unjust power, degenerated into all the vileness and methods of servitude. Blind submission grew the only means of preferment and indeed of safety. So you create fear. What man wants to live and work under tyranny without the freedom to speak? What kind of man, by the way, is created in that atmosphere? a man afraid to say anything. What does that do to a man's spirit? You want men of courage. Men durst not open their mouths, but to flatter. Pliny the Younger observes that this dread of tyranny had such effect that the Senate, the great Roman Senate, became at last stupid and dumb. So the great Roman Senate became dumb and stupid, and people as well, right? So if you want dumb and stupid people, take away free speech. So see, there are many problems with it. Suppress it. Suppress the truth. Start suppressing the truth, and it'll shrink the minds. If you have to start accepting crazy things that you know are untrue, and they say crazy things that we know are untrue. Hence, says he, our spirit and genius are stupefied, broken, and sunk forever. That's sad, right? There are a lot of broken men today. You break the spirit of men. That's important not to do that, right? But it's good if you want tyranny. It's good if you want an all-powerful government that controls everything. They would want to break the spirit of men, right? And in one of his epistles, speaking of the works of his uncle, he makes an apology for 8 of them as not written with the same vigor which was to be found in the rest. For that these 8 were written in the reign of Nero, when the spirit of writing was cramped by fear. All ministers, therefore, who were oppressors or intended to be oppressors have been loud in their complaints against freedom of speech. So the oppressors are going to be loud. You need to watch for this. Whomever is trying to come up with, oh, there's hate speech, there's this, there's that, is trying to suppress the truth, suppress speech. And you have to watch for those politicians, those people in government. The license of the press, and always restrained or endeavored to restrain both. So watch who tries to restrain the press, social media companies. You know, if there was, for example, a man who took over a new company, it was a big technology company, and the government suddenly started identifying him as a target for that platform to be able to have free speech, that would be something to look for, right? Watch who they attack, right? Watch whom they don't want to have free speech. In consequence of this, they have browbeaten writers, punished them violently and against law, and burnt their works, by all which they showed how much truth alarmed them. Truth alarms them, right? Truth does concern many people today, right? Can't stand it, can't tolerate it. They hate the truth. Watch who hates the truth. Self-evident truths. See how bad governments don't like truth. Truth is an enormous thing, right? There's a famous instance of this in Tacitus. He tells us that Quartus, having in his annals praised Brutus and Cassius, gave offense to Sejanus, first minister, and to some inferior sycophants in the court of Tiberius, who, conscious of their own characters, took the praise bestowed on every worthy Roman to be many reproaches pointed at themselves. They therefore complained of the book to the Senate, which, being now only the machine of tyranny, condemned it to be burnt. But this did not prevent its spreading. Being censured, it was the more sought after. Now this is good. From hence, says Tacitus, we may wonder at the stupidity of those statesmen who hope to extinguish, by the terror of their power, the memory of their actions, for quite otherwise, the punishment of good writers gains credit to their writings. It's a great line. Nor did ever any government who practiced impolitic severity get anything by it but infamy to themselves, and renown to those who suffered under it. Freedom of speech, therefore, being of such infinite importance to the preservation of liberty, Tacitus says, everyone who loves liberty ought to encourage freedom of speech. So you can watch who's encouraging freedom of speech and who's discouraging it, and there'll be a clear line. Just look for it. Who's advancing freedom of speech today, and whom is trying to curtail it? Who is trying to suppress the truth, and who is speaking the truth? Because there's a lot of suppression of truth, and outright more than that. When we know things are self-evident and people are trying to suppress that truth, that's a large danger to head to tyranny. And it will stifle minds, and it will break spirits, because you know internally what the truth is, yet they're saying that this is not the truth. And they may be even calling you saying the truth is evil, right? So who wants to take away the truth using clever language? Watch for clever language. And says they're protecting someone else when they're actually protecting themselves and the powers of the government, right? And here's his warning. Hence it is that I, living in a country of liberty and under the best prince upon earth, shall take this very favorable opportunity of serving mankind by warning them of the hideous mischiefs that they will suffer if ever corrupt and wicked men shall hereafter get possession of any state, and the power of betraying their master. And in order to do this, I will show them by what steps they will probably proceed to accomplish their traitors' ends. Maximus tells us, having complained in a popular assembly of the overgrown power of Pompey, the whole people answered him with a shout of approbation, upon which the council told them, shout on, gentlemen, shout on, and use those bold signs of liberty while you may, for I do not know how long they will be allowed you. God be thanked, we Englishmen have neither lost our liberties nor are in danger of losing them. Let us always cherish this matchless blessing. Are we doing that here? Almost peculiar to ourselves that our posterity may many ages hence ascribe their freedom to our zeal. Are we protecting freedom of speech? The defense of liberty is a noble, a heavenly office, which also fighting for the truth is, right? It's noble to fight for the truth. The defense of liberty is a noble, a heavenly office, which can only be performed where liberty is, or as the same Maximus observes. I think we get the point. So it's up to us to protect the truth. Do you want to be more noble? Do you want to have more opportunity for success? Because losing freedom of speech will crush minds, hurt your creativity, hurt you in providing for your family, hurt you in protecting your property. We have freedom of speech in America, written in the Bill of Rights, but it's up to us to protect it. It goes hand in hand with protecting the things you own and the people you love, your private property, your other personal items, and your liberty. We can't let it be constrained. Men must be able to think, write, and speak, or you will have a government that destroys liberty in minds. Building stronger, better men for better lives. Thank you. If you think it's important to build better, stronger men, please subscribe. We would appreciate it.